I found out my wife was cheating on me from the most humiliating place possible, our bedroom, while standing next to a vase full of fresh lilies I'd bought that morning for our anniversary. My name is Kevin Pierce. I'm 39 years old, and I've been married to Veronica for almost 11 years. At least that's what the tax form still said. We had a comfortable life. Suburban home in Charlotte, North Carolina. 2 golden retrievers. I worked in corporate security for a large logistics firm. Think background checks, internal audits, quiet firings when someone fudges the numbers. Veronica taught art at a local charter school and dabbled in photography on the side. From the outside, we were picture perfect. But pictures lie. That day, our 10th wedding anniversary, I left work early. I had the flowers, a reservation at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date, and 2 plane tickets to the Bahamas as a surprise. We hadn't taken a real vacation in years, not since Veronica's mother passed, and she'd fallen into that long, drawn-out sadness that never really went away. I thought maybe this trip would be the thing that helped her breathe again. I pulled into our driveway around 3 p.m., her car already there. I smiled, figuring she must have gotten off early too. Maybe she was planning something special for me too. That kind of sweet optimism only lives in fools. I walked in through the front door, expecting to smell candles or hear music. But the house was quiet. I remember thinking how still it felt. Too still. I set the lilies down on the kitchen counter, took off my shoes quietly, and walked upstairs, maybe half hoping to catch her scrambling to wrap a gift or light candles. You know, one of those movie moments. Instead, I heard the bed creaking. At first, I didn't register it. It was subtle, rhythmic. Then I heard a muffled sound. A voice. Not hers. Deeper. Male. I stopped breathing. I can still see the sunlight pouring in through the hallway window, casting soft shadows on the carpet as I stood there frozen, trying to process what my ears were telling me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an innocent scene. It was betrayal, raw and real, playing out behind my bedroom door. I didn't kick it open. I didn't burst in and scream. I just turned around and walked back downstairs, numb from the ears down. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the lilies I'd bought like they were some cruel joke. About 10 minutes later, I heard the door creak open upstairs. Then footsteps, 2 sets, whispering, panic. I heard the guy rush down the stairs and bolt out the front door. I didn't move. Veronica came down a minute later, wrapped in a bathrobe, her hair a mess, face flushed. She stopped when she saw me at the table. Kevin. That's all she said. Like that one word was enough. Like it could explain everything. I didn't respond. I just looked at her and waited for her to say something that made it all okay. She didn't. I thought you were working late, she said finally, like that changed anything. That's what you're opening with? I asked. There was a long pause. She looked away. It wasn't supposed to happen today, she whispered, as if rescheduling it would have made it less of a betrayal. I nodded slowly, trying to hold on to something solid inside me. I couldn't find it. How long? She hesitated. That told me everything. 6 months, she admitted. 6 months. Half a year. That was Thanksgiving. That was Christmas. That was our New Year's trip to Asheville. All while she was lying to my face, crawling into my bed, pretending. I stood up slowly, walked past her, and grabbed the plane tickets off the counter. I handed them to her. Congratulations, I said. Now you have 2 seats to paradise. You just need to decide which of you gets the window. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with this strange mixture of guilt and something else, relief. That's when I knew. She wasn't sorry I found out. She was just sorry it ended this way. I packed a bag and left within the hour. No fights. No drama. Just the hollow sound of the front door closing behind me. I stayed at a cheap hotel for a few nights, then moved in with a buddy from work. The next few days passed in a fog. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head. How calm she looked, how easy the lie had come. But the more I thought about it, the more questions started crawling out of the shadows. How did she have time to hide this? Who was the guy? Where had she met him? What else had she been hiding? I didn't want answers. I needed them. And once I started digging, I realized Veronica's betrayal was only the surface of something deeper, something much worse. This wasn't just an affair. It was a setup. The first week after I left our home was a blur of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and the quiet, unrelenting ache of betrayal that settled deep into my chest and refused to move. I stayed in a furnished rental across town, a cold and impersonal space that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet glue, and spent my evenings replaying that moment in the kitchen over and over, searching for some sign I had missed, some early warning that would have made the crash less devastating. Veronica's messages came steadily, first as a trickle, then as a downpour, each one an attempt to explain, to minimize, to rewrite the story so that it didn't sound like betrayal, but instead like confusion or emotional distance or some vague search for clarity. But beneath her words, I sensed calculation, not remorse. By the end of the second week, I sent her one final message, a sentence so measured and deliberate that I had to rewrite it 3 times before hitting send. I told her a lawyer would be in touch and that she was not to contact me again. I thought that would be the end of it, a clean line drawn in the sand. But instead it was the beginning of something worse, because once the communication stopped, the silence turned into a weapon. That quiet, that absence of pleading or panic on her part, told me something I hadn't wanted to admit until that moment. Veronica hadn't just slipped into an affair. She had made plans. The lawyer I hired was Carla Monroe, a woman with the kind of eyes that didn't blink when they saw the worst in people and the kind of voice that turned calmness into something surgical. After I told her what had happened, after I explained what I had walked in on and how Veronica had barely reacted, Carla leaned back in her chair, folded her hands neatly, and asked the question that had been burning at the back of my mind since the moment I left the house. "Do you want a clean divorce?" she asked. "Or do you want the truth before you decide how far to take this?" Without hesitation, I told her I wanted the truth. Carla introduced me to Greg Stanton, a private investigator who looked like he had stepped straight out of a faded crime novel, complete with a permanently wrinkled suit and a voice roughened by years of keeping other people's secrets. I handed him everything I had, Veronica's schedule, her email address, a couple of unexplained receipts, and the names of a few colleagues she often mentioned but never introduced me to. Greg said he would be in touch within a few days, and when he called, his voice had the hard edge of someone who had seen more than he wanted to. "His name is Scott Weller," Greg said, not even bothering with a preamble. "He's 42, teaches part-time photography at your wife's school, works in real estate on the side, recently divorced, no kids. They've known each other for at least 3 years." That alone was enough to knock the wind out of me, but Greg wasn't finished. He continued without pause, his voice steady and unflinching. 8 months ago, they registered an LLC together, Pierce Weller Creative. She used your last name. Business filings show her as majority owner. Photography services, event packages, branding consultations. It's not a massive operation, but they've already landed 3 clients, and they're actively courting more. I gripped the edge of the counter while the world shifted beneath my feet, because hearing the words was one thing, but processing them was another entirely. Veronica hadn't just cheated on me emotionally or physically. She had used my name, my reputation, and likely my money to build a business with the man she had been sneaking around with for months. I asked Greg where the funding was coming from, already fearing the answer, and when he hesitated for just a second, I knew I wasn't going to like what came next. "She opened a business card under your name," he said flatly. "The bank records show steady charges, equipment rentals, ad campaigns, website costs, hotel bookings. None of them show up on the statements you probably check regularly. She likely forged the authorization form." Hearing it out loud felt like getting kicked in the stomach and then having someone explain why you should be grateful for the lesson. Veronica hadn't just been planning an exit. She had been building a new life using me as her foundation, fully intending to leave me buried in the rubble. When I brought the findings to Carla, she reviewed the documents with a level of focus that made it clear this was no longer just a routine divorce. She said Veronica's actions weren't just unethical, they were criminal. If we wanted to, we could press charges for fraud, identity theft, and financial abuse. The idea of sending my wife to jail didn't sit comfortably with me, but the idea of letting her walk away unscathed after orchestrating this level of deceit was worse. That was when things took an even darker turn. Just days after we filed the first wave of legal motions, I received a summons to meet with human resources at my company. They had received an anonymous complaint claiming that I had made inappropriate comments at a client dinner 6 months prior. The complaint was vague, impossible to verify, and completely out of character with the reputation I had built over the years, but it was serious enough to warrant an investigation. and I knew immediately that it hadn't come from anyone inside the company. Veronica had made her move. She wasn't just trying to separate her life from mine. She was trying to destroy mine in the process, brick by brick, until there was nothing left of me that didn't belong to her memory of who I used to be. This wasn't about closure, or even revenge on her part. It was about control. It always had been. And if I was going to survive this, I knew I couldn't just fight back. I had to dismantle the entire structure she had built, quietly, thoroughly, and without mercy. When you're betrayed by the person who once made your coffee just the way you liked it, who kissed your forehead while you were half asleep and talked about growing old on the porch together, there's a moment when your mind fractures, not from the pain itself, but from the realization that the past you trusted was never real in the first place. In the weeks after the HR complaint surfaced and my lawyer began filing motions that would pull Veronica's lies out into daylight, I found myself drowning in that fracture, unable to trust anything, not my memories, not my instincts, and certainly not the people who said they had my back. It was during one of those late nights, when I couldn't sleep and had started scrolling through old photos on my phone for reasons I still can't explain, that I received a message that, at first glance, felt like spam. The name on the screen read Alyssa Mendoza, a name I didn't recognize at all, and the message was short but too precise to ignore. We need to talk about Scott Weller. I don't think you know what kind of man he really is. At first, I assumed it was someone trying to bait me into an argument or someone trying to protect Veronica from legal consequences by making Scott look like the true villain. But I replied anyway, curiosity pushing past my caution, and within minutes she sent another message, this one longer, more detailed, and accompanied by screenshots that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the day I walked in on my wife. Alyssa was Scott's ex-girlfriend, though that word didn't seem to do justice to what she described. They had dated for over 2 years, starting while he was still officially married. And according to her, Scott had a pattern. He got involved with women who were already in committed relationships, inserted himself as a confidant, then began peeling them away from their partners using charm, manipulation, and a heavy dose of fabricated empathy. She said he often played the wounded soul, the misunderstood artist, the guy who just wanted to help women feel seen and appreciated. But behind the scenes, he had a habit of collecting favors, pushing financial boundaries, and, when things didn't go his way, unleashing subtle threats to make sure no one ever challenged his version of events. At first, I thought maybe Alyssa was exaggerating or acting out of bitterness, but the more she revealed, the more the pieces aligned too perfectly to ignore. She showed me a series of emails from Scott to another woman, dated just weeks before I caught Veronica with him. And in those emails, he was repeating the exact same phrases Veronica had used with me when we first started drifting apart. Words like emotional suffocation, outgrowing the relationship, and needing space to breathe. The phrasing wasn't just similar, it was identical. Scott had been feeding her lines, scripting her detachment like a playwright directing the fall of a character he never intended to save. The most damning detail came in the form of a bank statement Alyssa still had access to, a joint account Scott had never removed her from. There, clear as day, were transfers into Pierce Weller Creative, including deposits that lined up perfectly with the dates of the fraudulent charges on the credit card Veronica had opened in my name. Scott wasn't just her partner in business and infidelity. He was her accomplice in fraud. I called Carla the next morning, and as soon as I explained what Alyssa had shared, she instructed me to bring everything, screenshots, bank records, the full chat history, so she could add them to the financial investigation already underway. Her tone was sharper now, less cautious and more aggressive, and when I asked her what this changed, she looked me square in the eye and said, everything. What we had once considered to be a single case of marital betrayal had now evolved into a coordinated effort to defraud, manipulate, and destroy. Carla explained that with this new evidence, we could file a civil suit against both Scott and Veronica for conspiracy to commit financial fraud. If successful, not only could I reclaim the money they had spent, but I could also force the dissolution of their business, freeze their accounts, and potentially have Scott barred from practicing real estate, especially if we discovered he had forged any documents tied to the LLC. Still, none of it brought me peace. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how hollow the past few years had been, How many times I had ignored signs because I wanted to believe in the image of the marriage we had presented to the world. And yet, something strange happened as I sat across from Alyssa later that week in a coffee shop near the courthouse, both of us nursing cold drinks we had barely touched. There was no spark between us, no shared longing or romantic undercurrent, just a quiet understanding that comes from being betrayed by the same liar, just in different ways. I thought I was helping him heal, she said, her voice low and tired. I didn't realize I was just the next step in his pattern. I nodded slowly, knowing exactly what she meant. I thought I was the solid ground for Veronica. Turns out, I was just a financial strategy. Alyssa laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of the exhaustion that comes with surviving a storm you never saw coming. We should have seen it, she said. We both ignored things. I mean, Scott kept 2 phones. Who needs 2 phones? I smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. Veronica used to delete her call history every night. I thought she was just a private person. We sat in silence after that, not awkward, just still. 2 people who had nothing to gain from lying to each other, and everything to learn from the wreckage left behind. Before we parted ways, Alyssa handed me a flash drive. Everything I have on Scott: contacts, contracts, emails. If you're going to bring him down, you're going to need more than just sympathy. And just like that, I had something I hadn't felt since the day my world cracked open: momentum. That evening, Carla reviewed the contents of the flash drive and found something we hadn't expected. There was an email chain between Scott and a name I hadn't seen before: Douglas Marr, an attorney with a reputation for handling business acquisitions, mostly in cash-heavy creative industries. The emails discussed valuation estimates for Pierce Weller Creative, projections for growth, and a tentative sale timeline. In simple terms, they had been planning to sell the business, my name, for a 6-figure sum within the year. That changed everything, because now the fraud had a dollar figure attached to it. And with that figure came the possibility of criminal charges, restitution, and public exposure that neither of them could walk away from. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for the truth, and for the chance to bring the entire structure they had built crashing down around them, brick by calculated brick. There's a moment when you stop being heartbroken and start becoming dangerous. Not because you want revenge, but because you finally understand just how far someone was willing to go to erase you. That was where I stood now, not grieving my wife or mourning my marriage, but standing in the ashes of what they'd tried to leave behind and realizing I was still holding the matchbook. With Carla coordinating the legal strategy and Greg feeding us intel, we had built a case strong enough to crush both Veronica and Scott under the weight of their own lies. Financial fraud, forged signatures, illegal use of my credit, a business with my name on it, funded by deception and built to be sold without me. I didn't want a courtroom brawl. I wanted collapse, clean, silent, total. I started with Scott. I walked into his real estate office wearing the suit I'd last worn to a wedding she danced barefoot at, and I handed him a manila folder with the calm of a man who already knew the outcome. He opened it and began flipping through pages: bank records, lawsuit notices, credit statements, and a signed affidavit from Alyssa that tied him to the entire scheme. "You think this scares me?" he said eventually, though his voice cracked just enough to betray him. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I think this ends you." He tried to hold his ground, but I didn't let up. "I know about the planned sale to Douglas Marr. The cash out. The rebrand. You and Veronica were going to dump me with the debt while you sold off my name. So here's the deal. You sign over your half of the business, you testify to the fraud, and maybe you don't lose your license." His bravado cracked under the pressure. 2 days later, Carla had his full cooperation in writing. He turned over internal communications, signed contracts, and, most damning of all, a recording, Veronica's voice, clear and cold, detailing exactly how they'd used the divorce to separate me from the debt while they walked away with the profits. Hearing her talk about me like that, like I was a loose end to be managed, was something I won't forget. She sounded calm, practical, almost proud of herself. While Carla drafted new charges, another shoe dropped. My company concluded its HR investigation, which had stemmed from the anonymous harassment complaint. Their IT department traced it to a fake account created from Veronica's IP address. The complaint had been baseless from the start, but now they had proof she had fabricated it herself. They reinstated me with a quiet apology. I gave them Carla's number and said they'd be hearing from her soon. That night, Veronica called me from an unrecognized number and left a voicemail. She cried, said she missed me, said Scott had used her, that things had gotten confused, that we owed each other a conversation. The next day, she emailed, then texted again. All of it came too late. She had made her choices with perfect clarity, and now I was responding in kind, with silence. By the end of the week, her business accounts were frozen. The LLC was suspended pending investigation. Scott's testimony laid the groundwork for formal criminal charges, and every client they had worked with was contacted with documentation of the fraud. Veronica's emails began to sound more erratic, first defensive, then pleading, then bitter. But I didn't answer. I had no need to. The destruction she tried to bring to my life had folded back on her, and the man she bet everything on had sold her out the second it got difficult. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up drenched in sweat. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, emptied out, and rebuilt. I had stepped into the fire and walked through it, not because I wanted to burn her, but because I refused to let her rewrite the story of who I was. In the months that followed, the wreckage settled into silence. The lawsuits moved forward with mechanical precision, guided by Carla's relentless attention to detail and Scott's now documented cooperation. Veronica, once defiant and defensive, quickly became cornered, her bank accounts frozen, her professional relationships severed, and the business she built on betrayal reduced to a line item in a fraud case that would follow her name for years. The last time I saw her in person was at the courthouse. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, stiff-backed in a navy dress too formal for the pretrial hearing, flanked by a new attorney who looked fresh out of school and clearly overwhelmed. She didn't turn around once, not even when the evidence was read aloud, not even when the judge acknowledged the fraudulent nature of the LLC she and Scott had registered in my name. I watched her from behind, the shape of her shoulders painfully familiar, the small twitch in her neck that used to mean she was anxious but trying to hide it. That part of me that once ached for her, the part that bought flowers and booked surprise trips and believed in vows, stood completely still. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for justice. I had already moved beyond both. After the hearing, as people gathered their things, she finally looked back. Her eyes met mine, just for a moment, and I saw it. That flicker of shame, followed by a flash of something colder. Not regret, not guilt, just the hollow resentment of someone who lost a game she thought she was destined to win. She opened her mouth slightly, like she might say something, but I stood and walked out before she could speak. I didn't need an apology. I didn't want an explanation. Whatever version of the story she needed to tell herself, she could keep it. Back in my real life, things began to take root again, not quickly and not easily, but with a steadiness that felt earned. My company cleared my name publicly and quietly dropped a hint to industry contacts that I had been the target of a personal vendetta, not the source of misconduct. Clients returned, trust was rebuilt, and the weight I'd carried for months finally began to lift. I moved into a new place, smaller, simpler, quieter. A place with no ghosts, no shared keys, no hidden passwords, or whispers behind doors. Just clean countertops, open windows, and the kind of silence that doesn't feel like punishment. I started waking up without checking my phone. I started sleeping with the blinds open again. The real surprise, though, came when Alyssa called. She wasn't reaching out for drama, or revenge, or some shared war story. She just wanted to let me know that Scott had left town, cut ties with her completely, and had recently tried to reinvent himself in another city under a different business name. But she had reported him to the state licensing board using the same documents we had compiled for the lawsuit. She ended the call with something simple, something I hadn't realized I needed to hear. "You weren't crazy," she said. "None of this was your fault." That truth settled deeper than any victory ever could. Because betrayal, real betrayal, doesn't just hurt you, it warps you. It rewrites the way you see yourself. You start to wonder if you were too blind, too weak, too trusting. But hearing someone else say it out loud, someone who had been used the same way I had, made it easier to release what I'd been carrying. Not forgiveness, just the weight of self-blame. Carla eventually closed the final chapter with an out-of-court settlement. Veronica surrendered all claims to shared assets. The house was sold. The debts were absorbed and cleared through restitution. She moved into a small condo across town, and from what I heard through Greg's last report, she was working part-time and fighting to hold on to what little social circle she had left. Her family had distanced themselves, not because of morality, but because her story no longer held up under scrutiny. Scott's testimony made it clear she had orchestrated most of the financial deception. Whatever power she once held over him had evaporated the moment his own freedom became negotiable. There was no grand reckoning, no public disgrace, just a quiet fall from the illusion of control. And that somehow felt right. Because what she had taken from me wasn't just money or pride, it was belief. In her, in us, in what we were supposed to be. You don't get that back by seeing someone punished. You get it back by becoming someone they can never touch again. One morning, I stood at the beach in Charleston, watching the tide pull back into the Atlantic, and thought about the man I had been just a year before. The one who bought flowers and whispered promises and never locked his phone. The one who believed love was its own safety net. I didn't hate that man, but I wasn't him anymore. The version of me that remained was sharper, quieter, not bitter but deeply aware. I would love again. Maybe not today, maybe not for a while, but when I did, it would be from a place of strength, not naivety. Whoever earned that version of me would meet someone forged by fire, and I would be ready.